When it comes to relationships, people sort of have a misunderstanding around how those work. They think kind of if they agree to do a project, somehow that sort of obviates the need for lawyers and all the rest of it. What you actually have there is you have a legal agreement between two people to do a thing. And at the end of the day, when you look at a contract, contracts aren't about agreements as such, in my mind. They're more about who's responsible for when it goes wrong. So I've been involved in crypto since advising on the first successful initial coin offering in the UK and the first ever equity issuance settled on chain. And I've specialized particularly on the legal and regulatory side, and that's grown and grown over the last couple of years. So recently we've been advising 3 regulators on creating and drafting the regulatory frameworks for crypto assets. We think that the whole thing's going to get bigger and bigger in terms of our regulation coming in, and I'm kind of in the center of that as a regulatory lawyer, effectively helping firms set up in a practical and cost-effective way to get things up and running, and then as they move forward, helping interact with the regulators, particularly in the UK, in order to position themselves so they can sell products and also look after their clients and move forward to the business. So I joined Gunnercooke about 3 years ago now, and started setting up the crypto practice there. We've grown actually as a firm now, so we've got 11 people who just do crypto, which means we're now the largest UK law firm advisor on the air. We've also, in addition, got places in Germany and in the US, so we're covering the major onshore jurisdictions. We see ourselves as kind of very much a crypto-focused firm. So, for example, we're the only major UK law firm currently accepting payment in crypto, at least we're the first to do that. And as a result, it's just growing and growing because we think that crypto is probably going to expand as an area in the next couple of years, and we want to be very much at the heart of that. Because you get larger businesses and you get small businesses, and they have different priorities. So for smaller businesses, it tends to be that they have a concept or an idea, and they need to launch that in a compliant and cost-effective way, which means that they can access their target market. For larger businesses, it tends to be more along the lines of they have an existing business which may not be in Web3, but they're looking to move in that direction, and therefore there's an educational element in terms of how it fits together, and also an interaction between these two types of businesses, and so that they can work together in the best way forwards, understanding the kind of differences in priorities between the two and the need for it to work together at the end. Kind of 2 elements to it really. There's relationships and there's regulators. When it comes to relationships, people sort of have a misunderstanding around how those work. They think kind of if they agree to do a project, somehow that sort of obviates the need for lawyers and all the rest of it. What you actually have there is you have a legal agreement between two people to do a thing. And at the end of the day, when you look at a contract, contracts aren't about agreements as such, in my mind. They're more about who's responsible for when it goes wrong. So when you're bringing in the lawyers on that side, what we're about looking at the relationship and going who's responsible for what at what point, and to what extent do they take liability for it if it goes wrong. And therefore it's a slightly pessimistic worldview, but it's one you suddenly need when it goes wrong, effectively. And to be blunt, it's cheaper to get it right from the outset than to have it go wrong and then try and deal with it in reverse. The second area, which is becoming increasingly important, is on the regulator side, because when you read the press, you've had a lot of issues with things like, perceived scams. You've had rug pulls and all the rest of it, and that will get people's attention, and they'll move you towards becoming regulated. And this is the new frameworks beginning to see. I think the key question is, just something what we mean by regulation here, because some people have this misconception that somehow if it's regulated, there's laws, and if it's not regulated, there aren't laws. That's not what we're getting at. What we're getting at with regulation is there's laws whether you're regulated or not. You cannot commit fraud, you cannot steal. These have been there since kind of the early days of the Bible. These are not specific to regulation in the slightest. What you've got for regulator is you've got an organization of people who are taking responsibility for what you do, how you operate, and how it goes. And therefore, how you position yourself with the regulator becomes important, because they will have a worldview as to how firms ought to behave. And therefore, firms need to be able to speak to regulators in that language and make sure that they act in a way which is collaborative with the regulator. Because if you don't do that, then the regulator's remit is to close things down if it perceives that they're a danger to the environment, the jurisdiction which the regulator operates in. So that's going to become increasingly an important part of the nexus. And for Web3 firms, it's particularly going to be interesting in the next couple of years, because these firms are not used to dealing with regulators, and therefore being able to deal in that way will come to them as slightly more of a challenge than, for example, in other industries where they're used to regulators, they know how they see the world, they know what they expect, they know what they think, and therefore they find an easier task to get through the hoops. So it's going to be a slightly bumpy road, but at the end of it, the advantage of having this is that effectively people have more faith within the industry because it is regulated, and that should drive up value for all the stakeholders within the industry. I always think you want to get a lawyer's view very early on in any project, because if the thing is intrinsically illegal, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, because sometimes things get caught in a way which we should not expect, and you want to speak to lawyers early on. So one of the things we always do is we give a 3 hours worth of chat effectively of regards kind of setting up the macro scheme. Because what I do not want to happen, I don't want people to build stuff and then come to me and then have to change it. I would far rather they spoke to me early on. In terms of how we operate, it depends a little bit on the company, because what we try and do is, if we can commoditize something to bring the price down, we do. So things like token launches, for example, can be easily commoditized and the price will come down and go forward on that basis. Other things, for example, like going for an FCA registration, are harder to commoditize and are intrinsically more expensive, but those are the sort of things that firms should only really go to when they've got the right resources and people in place to go for those sorts of things. So effectively, it's a very different sort of conversation. You've got two options which I tend to look at a lot. You can either contact me by email, or I'm on LinkedIn, james.burnie FRSA, and I'm also on Telegram and WhatsApp. But probably email or LinkedIn are probably the easiest ways to get me.